Hello and welcome to Teaching Hourly. I'm Jonathan Stark. Today I'm joined by guest Alice Lee-Yoon. Alice is a prospective PhD student and her research looks at the link between time, money, and employee happiness. Her papers have been published in leading journals such as Current Opinion in Psychology and Academy of Management Journal, and her works have also been covered in Harvard Business Review, Psychology Today, and New York Magazine. Please stay tuned for my interview with Alice Lee-Yoon. Alice, welcome to the show.
Hi, Jonathan. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Could you tell folks a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Alice Lee-Yoon, and I'm going into my PhD this year studying about employee well-being and how they make time and money trade-offs impact their happiness.
Well, definitely in the right place here. So I guess we met, air quotes, over email in response to an article I read that linked to a paper that you and Ashley Willens wrote. Yeah. And that's what I wanted to talk about today. That paper was called Making Seconds Count When Valuing Time Promotes Subjective Well-Being. Could you kind of tell folks just a little summary of what the paper is about and then maybe talk about how you came to write it?
Yeah, sure. So there has been this notion that our time equals money, if you have heard about it. But a lot of research shows that thinking of our time as money leads to various negative well-being consequences, whereas valuing our time more than money enhances our well-being. So in our paper, we're basically trying to put all these evidence together from past research to propose a conceptual framework showing how valuing our time more than money versus valuing our time like money impacts our happiness in different ways, which I think we'll be talking about more in a second.
Yeah, this is great because for over a decade, I've been kind of railing against hourly billing, and I had lots of anecdotal evidence that it was a bad thing, and theoretically, you can point to dozens of reasons why it's a bad idea for the client and for the seller and the buyer and the success of the project that they're undertaking. But to suddenly fall into what looks like a giant pile of research that scientifically sort of proves or agrees with that my stance was pretty exciting. At the end of the paper, you listed, I think it's 31 different references, I guess. I'm not really academic. Are these footnotes or references or other papers? Like what are all the things you're linking to at the end there?
Yeah, so these are reference from past papers, all showing how valuing our time more than money improves well-being versus valuing our time like money or thinking about the economic value of time undermines our well-being. So yeah, those are all the research showing the same type of evidence.
Can you describe what you, sort of in a more elaborate way, what you mean by valuing time like money versus valuing time more than money? Because a lot of people's heads are spinning. They're like, what does that even mean?
Right. When we're valuing time like money, I'm saying thinking about the economic value of time. And when people are thinking about the economic value of time, they're thinking about how much money their time is worth. So, for example, if I decide to invest an hour of my time volunteering, I'm thinking about the monetary returns of my decisions to volunteer. And of course, volunteering is an uncompensated activity. So when people think about the economic value of time, they tend to volunteer less compared to people who value time more than money. And I think I should also talk about the trade-offs between time and money. So valuing time more than money involves this thinking of trade-offs. And because time and money are both precious and scarce resource, in a typical day, we constantly face trade-offs between time and money. And an example of this might be to decide whether to spend time on a Saturday morning doing chores or to pay for a house cleaning service instead. And this is a more mundane type of example, but this time and money trade-off also applies to major life events. For example, one might choose a higher paying job that demands longer work hours, or one could choose to make less money and have more free time. So you can see that in these examples that one resource comes in the expense of the other resource. And if you choose to have more time, then you might end up spending more money and vice versa. And people who value time more than money, what I mean by that is they are choosing to have more time at the expense of having more money.
You're preaching to the choir with me, that's for sure. I can remember, when I was getting paid, when I did think like time is money, when I would do something like go on vacation, the whole time I'd be thinking, instead of like enjoying the vacation, the whole time I'd be thinking like how much money I was losing, air quotes.
Right.
And another thing that I see with folks who freelance, and this is maybe a little bit more businessy or technical, not so much like emotional well-being, but people tend to discount their time. And I don't mean discount like charge less for it. They discount it as a cost. And they'll think, I'm making $200 an hour while I do this. And they'll think from a business standpoint, they'll think of that as profit, when in fact, it's not profit. It's not all profit. Maybe a little bit of it is. But for example, well, actually, that's an interesting question for you. Do you get into, or do any of the studies get into the difference between someone who charges very little per hour and someone who charges a lot per hour relatively?
We do look at performance incentives, if that is related to your question.
It may or may not be. What do you mean by that?
So one factor that promotes an economic value of time is hourly wage, but also performance incentives has the same mechanism with hourly wage. So if people are paid for better performance and if they're paid a commission or a bonus for their work, they become more, they kind of adopt this mindset focused on maximizing productivity, and that leads them to work more hours. And these all sorts of activities that are known to undermine well-being, like volunteering less and socializing less. And if that is kind of answering your question.
Yeah, it does. It actually gets at an upcoming question I had about productivity, which that now explains it, because there's a point in the paper where you mentioned that it does lead to attempting to maximize productivity, which actually didn't click with me from an hourly standpoint, but it does from a bonus. When you say productivity, I take it to mean like efficiency, but is that not correct?
What we mean by productivity is also, it could mean efficiency, but also like thinking how we should spend our time in order to maximize the financial returns that we get. So instead of investing our time in close social relationships, maybe people would want to spend more time with their colleagues because that would be more likely to earn them more money or give them more success at work.
Right. Yeah. From a freelance standpoint, where many people are sort of on their own, working by themselves, and in lots of cases remotely, how productive they are in a given hour is irrelevant, because it's irrelevant because you get paid for the hour. It doesn't matter how productive you were. It's not even measured. It's, I think, a little bit different than an hourly wage type of situation. So actually, that's an interesting question, because the article that I read was called "The Psychological Trap of Freelancing" by Charlotte Cowles, and she talked about her mental state as a freelancer, and coming across your paper and some of the other research, and how it just led to just a negative state of mind. Is that how much of that do you think? How do I ask this question? So, you are studying a broader population than I typically pay attention to. It sounds like and this article by Charlotte is about freelancers. She references your paper, but it sounds like your research is much larger than just freelancers or self-employed individuals. It sounds like it also includes people who punch the clock, basically, for an employer. Is that right?
Yes. So we're basically looking at just people in general, or more specifically, we also look at hourly versus non-hourly workers and people who are paid by their performance. And yes, so I'm a little less familiar with freelancers, but I guess like they're all kind of on a similar page. Yeah,
that totally makes sense to me. There's I'm just guessing, but I would imagine, just from past experience, that that working by the hour, sort of on the clock in, say, a warehouse as a full-time employee, is related to, but has some significant differences between that and, say, someone who's doing web design in their basement by the hour. There's for multiple clients, perhaps remotely. There's a million differences between those two kinds of jobs, but having done both of those, I can think back to the same kind of mentality where when I charged for the hour by either one of those, even though in one case I was running a business essentially, and in the other I was working for someone else's business, it still has this, it's hard to describe. It's a very mercenary mindset. If that's how I would describe it. It sort of feels like I don't want to even, anytime I'm off the clock, I want to get back on the clock because I feel like I'm losing money whether it's on vacation or whether I'm interrupted on my way to lunch by someone I haven't seen in a while, and they're chatting, and I'm like, this is costing me $10 a minute to talk to you, that kind of a thing.
Yeah, that's a really good example of the economic value of time, because you're thinking about how much money your time is worth and thinking about like how much that would give you money if you're spending your time in other ways, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't feel healthy. It feels like a really unhealthy way to think. It's not a good feeling.
Yeah, and there are a lot of research showing like why that is unhealthy for you. So, for example, if you're thinking about the monetary value of your time, you again adopt a mindset focused on maximizing productivity, and that leads to various outcomes that undermine your well-being. For example, in one paper, they tested hourly versus non-hourly workers. And in this study, the researchers found that when you're paid by the hour, you tend to think about the monetary value of your time, and that leads to not engaging in uncompensated activities like volunteering. But volunteering is known to increase your happiness and your life satisfaction and meaning in life. And also, when you're thinking about the economic value of your time, you tend to spend less time with your loved ones, like family and friends, but you spend more time doing work and socializing with colleagues, which is known to be just a little less good for your happiness. It does increase your happiness by socializing, but less than your loved ones, like family and friends. So,
yeah, it makes sense when you say it. But I think some people will hear that and think that, well, yeah, they're thinking to themselves, oh, well, yeah, I would like to do that, but I have to work. I have to like that. They're not even connecting the two, like that they're mutually exclusive, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So one of the things that probably the primary theme of this podcast over the years has been that it's not a binary decision. So if you do charge based on your time, some time unit, it's usually hours, but lawyers leaving you down to 6-minute increments, 1/10 of an hour. So if you connect that with your income, then this mindset is an almost inevitable outgrowth of that. It's certainly difficult to escape outgrowth of that mindset, and it tends to lead to I'm not going to say depression, but like less happiness. Mm-hmm. But they see it as like, most people see it as like it's not a choice. Like I don't have a choice. I have to work. I have to make an income, and hourly is how you do it. And the theme of the show is like, well, no, you could disconnect your time from your money and give a price for a particular, say, project or a particular service, and disconnect your time from your money so that you don't feel like every hour that ticks off the clock where you weren't on the clock, you've lost that money. It allows you to just give a price to someone for something, and then you deliver that something as quickly as you can, quickly and effectively, and at a high quality as you can. And that leaves it's hard to describe, but takes away that false choice between like, well, yeah, I'd like to spend time with my kids, but we have all these bills, so I have to work more hours. Not even harder. I mean, it's harder to work more hours in a week, but in each individual hour, there's no measure of hardness of working for freelancers and consultants. It's like you just put in the time and you do a good job to the extent that you know, to your own standard. And then at the end, hopefully you finish in time for the client to be happy. But if you, what I'm struggling to call out here is that you don't have to charge by the hour. You could charge by the outcome or basically the outcome of the project, whatever the client is looking for from you. And all of a sudden, all those things disappear. Like all of that, like, oh, I'm wasting time. What you think like, oh, I'm wasting time, but what really you're saying is you're losing money.
Putting a price on a project, do you mean like receiving a salary? Because we have a measure that we're trying to separate two groups, and one group is asked to think about the hourly wage that they're receiving for this project, but the other group is just told that they would receive a fixed amount of pay at the end of the project. And are you getting at this kind of idea?
Yes, with one important exception, which is that the worker is picking the price, not the employer. So it's different. It's different a little bit. Conceptually, it's the same as a salary because you negotiate a salary. But to me, having been in that situation in the past, you don't feel like you've got very much power in that negotiation. So I think of it a more empowered way where you've got clients and you have more than one client. So it doesn't feel like an all or nothing proposition, all or nothing negotiation. You could certainly set a price for something that the client doesn't like, and you just walk away from it. You'd be like, well, I'll find a different client. From a psychological standpoint, have to imagine that there's some important distinctions between someone who works for themselves by the hour or not by the hour, and someone who is an employee who's being paid either hourly or a salary. Because I've done all of these things, and to me, they all have felt very different. Again, that's just anecdotal, but your level of autonomy and I don't know, just control over your destiny or your fate or something it's a completely different level when you're working for yourself.
So our research has mostly examined workers who are working under an employer. But to think about self-employed employees, I think the underlying mechanism might be similar. So even if they're self-employed, like what you said, putting a price on a project would like make all those economic value of their time disappear, and to basically experience the benefit of those people who are prioritizing their time over money. And so I agree with your statement there, and I think self-employed and also employed employees might have similar outcomes. Sorry.
Yeah, it makes it's wild. There's so many factors going on, but I do think that, again, this is just thinking back to my past, and people I've spoken with as well, but mostly just thinking back to when I was on the clock for some menial labor type of job, and the way that you just think about, I just have to get through this day. You're not like it's the worst of all. I think that's the worst of all the combination of factors, some economic and some not, that really make that super tedious and unsatisfying perhaps. And then there's maybe a spectrum where you can kind of go up the hierarchy of like, okay, now I'm like, more knowledge work, but still by the hour, and then maybe salaried or they're self-employed, but by the hour. It's like there are lots of differences to all of those things. At least there have been in my life, but there's a really key underlying connection to all of them, which is that trading time for money and the emotional, and I got to say negative emotional effects that puts on you. It's, I don't know if you've seen the quote. It's a Ben Franklin quote. It's something like, I think he was the guy that said time is money.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he talked about exactly the situation of, the worker, whatever he called him, like the worker needs to recognize that, his, wasn't vacation. It was leisure time. Leisure isn't free. It's costing you money. And I was like, no, I'm like, sorry, Ben, I got to disagree with you on that one. It's like, if you do think of time, especially in an hourly basis, if you think of time as money, time, equate time with money, it's really bad for your psychology. And it's also for my audience, it's really bad for the project, because you're doing things in a way where you're not doing things the most efficient way. I don't care how efficient you think you are. You will be way more efficient if you lose money by working slowly, or if you would gain money by working faster. So you get a lot more creative, and it allows you to deliver the same amount or maybe even more economic value in less time, which leaves you more time left over to be a happy human being by connecting with your family and social groups and volunteering, and maybe you like your clients too, and that's great. But I don't think you like your clients more than your kids, well, hopefully. So, you have to imagine that the more time that you spend with these really tight social relationships, I don't know, is that a safe assumption? The more time you spend with like really close social connections, the better you're going to feel, or is that a massive overstatement?
Yeah, that's correct. But even like fleeting social interactions also improve your positive mood. And so basically spending more time fostering social relationships kind of improves your well-being. And I think on top of all those like positive benefits of prioritizing time over money, there's also this interesting finding about ethicality. If you value your money more than time and think about the economic value of your time, then because you're prioritizing like the productivity, and like you become more money focused, and like that promotes self-interested behaviors. You become seeking, like you seek personal goals and success and being less helpful to others, and this leads to undermined ethicality. So this was tested during a lab task, and they found that people who were primed to think about money more than time cheated more during a lab task. And
Wow.
I think this is another interesting outcome.
Wow, this is amazing. I would highly recommend to everybody to go to the show notes for this episode and find the link to this paper. Again, it's called Making Seconds Count When Valuing Time Promotes Subjective Well-Being. And give it a read. It's not super long, and
Just 3 pages.
yeah, it's probably more footnotes than, but it links to a bunch of really great information that you can check out on your own, or you'll probably be hearing from me as I drill into it, because there's tons of great stuff here. All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show, Alice. Is there some place that folks can find you online, or do you have a website that you're putting together?
Yes, I'm just starting my PhD this year, so maybe I'll have a website soon.
Okay, great. Well, I'm sure folks are going to be hearing more from me about you in the future. So let me know when you get that up, and we'll link out to it.
Thank you so much for having me today.
My pleasure. Thanks for coming, Alice.
Yeah, thank you.
Would you like to learn how to get paid what you're worth? How about selling your expertise and not your labor? We work through all of this together in the pricing seminar. Pre-registration starts soon, and you can sign up to be among the first to know when early bird pricing is announced at thepricingseminar.com. That URL again is thepricingseminar.com. Hope to see you there.